Hey everybody, Steven here, and today a different video than I normally do. Today I have a PC upgrade that I'm going to be showcasing and talking about the various components that I have here. This is my main rig, and it's had issues the last couple of months. I've had this for about 3 years now. I really like the Height Y60 case, but the PCIe riser here is the nail in the coffin, as this just went out and I don't want to mess with this thing anymore. So I reached out to ROG and asked if they could help me out, and thankfully they said yes. And so I'm collaborating with them on this. They sent over a ton of components here. The only thing that I'm really bringing to this build is going to be the GPU and CPU. Now, I'm not going to be doing a bunch of in-depth testing with this. I'm going to leave that for the other channels like Gamers Nexus, and they actually have the resources and the time to do that. Instead, what I want to actually highlight is a lot of the cool features that they may just kind of gloss over really quick or not talk about at all with these components. So with that being said, let's go ahead and look at all the various components with this. I'll showcase the build process and then show the final product, which is actually sitting right behind me here. And what I will say about this thing, it's pretty f***ing cool. So let's go ahead and get into this build. To start, let's look at all the components I have, starting with the case, which is the TUF GT502 Horizon. For the motherboard, I have the Strix X870E-E gaming Wi-Fi, which I'll pair with the Ryzen 9800X 3D CPU, and that I'm going to be cooling with the Ryujin III 360 ARGB Extreme AIO water cooler. For the RAM and M.2 SSD, ROG paired with Viper Gaming, and they sent over the 64GB Viper Venom DDR5, which runs at 6400 MHz, and the VP 4300 Lite 4TB M.2. This will all be powered by the ROG Strix 1000 watt Platinum power supply. Next, let's get into some of the technical specs and features with these parts, starting with the case. So here you have the fully panoramic tempered glass in the front. This is a dual chamber setup. This has 3 different locations that you can put a radiator, the top, side, and rear, which there is a small caveat to that I will talk about in regards to the Ryujin 3 here in a little bit. And then this can house up to 13 fans if you wanted to put that many in here. And there is an RGB L light strip that you can get specifically made for this case. I initially didn't have that. I did go ahead and order that after I kind of built this thing just because I wanted to see what it would look like with it. So I will showcase and talk about that at the very end. And then 2 cool features that I like about this that you will notice kind of right out of the box. The first is these removable Velcro straps, which just make this very easy to move. And the second, this is a toolless side panel design. There are 2 buttons on the back, one for the back, one for the front. You simply push that in, it pops out, and then you can remove it. Once you put it back, you kind of just slot it into this little groove, push it in, and it clicks in, and it is secure. So here you can see the 2 buttons. Again, one for the front, one for the back, and it angles it so it's not something where it's just going to fall out and then you're accidentally going to break it or dent it or anything like that. Extremely easy to use. I really like this. I wish other cases would adopt this feature. Going back to those carrying straps though, those are going to come in handy because without any components in this, this is 23 pounds. So it is on the heavier side, and it's going to be much heavier obviously once you put all of your components inside of this thing. And for the product dimensions, this is 11.2 inches deep, 17.6 inches wide, and 17.7 inches tall. For the front I/O, this has 2 USB 3.2 Gen 1s. This has 1 USB 3.2 Gen Type C port with up to 20 gigabytes per second of transfer speed. This has a headphone/microphone jack and an LED light control button, which you can actually pair with that light strip that I was talking about earlier that I will showcase at the end here. Now this is an ATX case here, but you can fit a micro ATX motherboard or an ITX motherboard in here if you wanted to. For the lengths for components, the max GPU length is 400 millimeters, max power supply unit length is 200 millimeters, and then the max CPU cooler is 163 millimeters. For radiator sizing on the top, you can go 120 millimeters all the way up to 360 and everything in between. You can do the same for the rear chamber option as well. For the side though, it's 120, 240, and then 360 for those sizing options. For fans, all of the 13 locations will hold a 120 millimeter fan. If you want to do 140, you can do 2 at the top, 2 on the rear, and 2 on the bottom. The very back fan is only compatible with 120 millimeters. It doesn't have the sizing for 140. In the rear chamber, you have a bracket that holds up the power supply unit, which I think is really nice here. It creates a space underneath it where you can run cables, making it easier to actually get those to the motherboard. There's also a foam pad that's backing where the motherboard sits, so you're not going to get any vibrational noise. You'll find a hard drive cage that holds one HDD or one SSD. You can remove that if you want as well, which is nice just to make more room if you need it. There are a total of 4 locations that you can hold hard drives, and you can mix and match the types of hard drives, but there's only 4 total here. You have the cage that I mentioned, and then you have the side radiator / fan location. It's going to have 3 metal plates that cover that up. You can remove those and then actually attach those hard drives to it. You don't have to put those back in that location. You can move it to the rear radiator location if you want to, which is what I ended up doing. And for dust filters, you're going to have one on the bottom, the top, and then the right-hand side. Moving on to the X870E-E motherboard, there is a ton going on with this thing that would take a full video by itself just to showcase. So here I'm not going to be covering everything in regards to this. I'm going to cover some of the basics in regards to specs, and then I'm really going to be talking about a lot of the cool quality of life features that they've added to this. So this is going to work with the Ryzen 7, 8, and 9000 series CPUs and supports up to 256 gigabytes of DDR5 RAM. Next, some of the really cool quality of life stuff that you have with this. You have a QLED, and then with that you get a Q code, so no more guessing what's going on with the motherboard. You can actually take that code and it's just telling you exactly what the issue is. And then you also have a start button on this, so you can simply press that to just kickstart the motherboard and turn everything on. You no longer need to take a screwdriver and connect the 2 power pins. And then on the rear panel, you have a clear CMOS and BIOS flashback button, which makes this way easier than jumping the pins for the CMOS or removing the battery. On the back panel, you also have the Q antenna for the Wi-Fi. This does have a Wi-Fi 7 here. You no longer need to screw in the Wi-Fi cables for the antenna. You simply just push this until it clips into place, and then it is good to go, and it holds very sturdy. And then when you're ready to remove this, you just tug a little bit, and then eventually it'll just pop out, and then it's detached. And then for the M.2 SSDs, you have one Q release, which you just push the push tab down and it releases the cover plate. All of the 5 M.2s have a Q latch, so you don't need to worry about the tiny screws getting lost. And one of these has a Q slide, so you can actually use this for different size M.2s if you want. For the 5 M.2s, 3 are PCIe 5.0 and then 2 are 4.0. 4 of these are 2280, and then one of these is 2211.0. There are 4 SATA ports on this, which may seem like it's on the low side, but the industry is shifting away from the regular SSDs and HDDs over to M.2, so you'll find a lot more M.2 slots on motherboards now, like this one, which has the 5, over the 6 to 8 SATA ports like previous motherboards used to have. Shifting to the back panel, ROG has decked this thing out. I always need a ton of USB ports, and this has me covered. Here you have 10 USB ports that run at 10 gigabytes per second. 9 of those are Type A, and then 1 of those is a Type C. You have 2 USB 4 Type C ports that can deliver up to 40 gigabytes per second for transfer speed. And then you have 1 USB Type C that can do 20 gigabytes per second that also delivers up to 30 watts of charging. So this has 4 USB Type-C ports and 9 USB-A ports for a total of 13 ports on the back of this. So again, you are really covered with this motherboard if you need a lot of ports. This also has an HDMI port, Realtek 5GB Ethernet, 2 gold-plated audio jacks, 1 optical port, and then the Wi-Fi 7 connection pins. And last, for the motherboard here, you have the ASUS AI intelligence that you can use. You can use the AI overclocking, AI cooling, and then the AI networking, which for some people, if you're a little bit intimidated by, you really don't have the know-how to overclock your components, this may be a good route for you. For everybody else that maybe you have overclocked in the past, it is something that you really like to do to your components. You also have all these new features for this motherboard that assist with that. You have the dynamic overclock switcher, core flex, asynchronous clock, and then the PBO enhancement. Now, if you want to pause the video here and read up on all of these features, you can do that, or I'll have a link for all of the components in the description, so you can go directly to ASUS's website to look at this. More in-depth testing channels will most likely do some really good testing on all of these things, but the main takeaway here is that ASUS is giving you a lot of tools when it comes to overclocking. And for that overclocking, the X870 VRM features 1822 power stages, with each rated to handle up to 110 amps. This has dual ProCool 2 power connectors to resist extreme temps, along with the alloy chokes and durable capacitors, which pairs nicely with a feature that the Ryujin 3 has that I'll talk about here in a moment. This also has an 8-layer PCB to help dissipate that heat, and it's going to provide more overclocking headroom. Now, this is going to bring us to the Ryujin 3, which is compatible with the AMD AM5 and 4, and then the Intel LGA 1851, 1700, 1200, and 115X. This has the latest 8th gen ATEC pump with 3-phase motor for better performance and noise reduction. The motor speed is 800 to 3600 RPMs plus or minus 10% RPMs, and then the water block speed runs at 5100 RPM plus or minus 10% for the RPMs. ROG has updated the cold plate, so this is 32% larger than previous versions. They've made the tubing larger in diameter as well. It's going to go up from 5 millimeters, and it is now 7 millimeters, which the total length for the tubing is 400 meters, so keep that in mind for your build. And then the radiator is now 3 millimeters thicker. And this has a really cool feature that feeds into that nice VRM heat dissipation that I was talking about earlier with the motherboard, which this has an embedded VRM fan on it. So here's going to be an exploded view of what this looks like. So on the bottom you have the retention kit, then you have the cold plate, then the 8th gen Aztec pump with 3-phase motor, and then you have that embedded VRM fan, and then on top of that is going to be that 3.5 inch display. And then on the outside of that molding for the display, you do have the vents to let the air in for that embedded VRM fan, and the top there is aluminum, so you're not going to easily damage that. This also comes with Noctua fans, which I think is really awesome that ROG paired with them for the fans on this. These are going to run at 2000 RPM. They have a 29.7 dBA for the fan noise, 3.94 millimeter H2O air pressure, and 71.6 CFM airflow. A really cool feature here is the fans are magnetic and the connection cables are magnetic as well. So attaching the fans and cables are a breeze. And then of course we have the really nice and large 3.5 inch LCD display. The internal memory here has been doubled from 16 megabytes up to 32 megabytes, so it's going to support clearer animations, as this can now support up to 2000 frames, up from 500 on previous versions. The screen runs at 60 FPS. This has a total brightness of 300 nits and supports 24-bit color. This also comes with a 6-year warranty, so you're covered for quite a long time. Next, we have the TUF Gaming TR120 fans. Not as much to cover here, but for the fan speed, we have the 2000 RPMs plus or minus 10%. We have the 3.3 millimeter H2O static pressure. We have 77.4 CFM airflow, and then for the noise level, this is 29 dBA. This comes with 16 adjustable RGB LED lights on it. This is 28 millimeters thick for the frame, and then this comes in both a black and white version as well as a reverse blade version. And last, powering all of this is going to be the ROG Strix 1000 watt Platinum power supply unit. Here we have the GaN MOSFET to deliver superior power efficiency by up to 30% over other 1000 watt power supply units, and a more organized internal layout means cooler operation for this. This has GPU first voltage sensing and intelligent voltage stabilizer to enhance voltage delivery by up to 45% to your GPU. We have large ROG heat sinks in this to make sure that we lower the temperatures and reduce the noise in this. This has dual ball fan bearings to last up to twice as long as regular sleeve bearing designs. And then this has 0 decibel technology to reduce the noise output. So the PWM controlled fan shuts off entirely when the power supply unit load is less than 40%. This is ATX 3.1 compatible. This has the 80 plus Platinum certification and the Lambda A plus certification, which means on average this power supply unit emits less than 20 decibels of noise. And last here we have the etched cables, which are really pliable, easy to maneuver and use. Definitely my favorite cables from a power supply unit to date because of this flexibility, because when you're plugging things in, there's not that rigidity there. It's just easy to put exactly where you need it. On top of this, this is UL 1581 and UL 758 certified, which is a flame test to make sure that you're not going to have any potential issues with this, because I think at this point everybody's seen those horror stories where the power supply unit cables are catching on fire with some of these higher end GPUs. Here I like the fact that they have put this through this vigorous testing to make sure that that isn't something that we're going to see with this product. And last, this does come with a 10-year warranty, so you do have a good peace of mind when it comes to this power supply unit. So now that I've talked about the components, let's get into the actual build here, and I'm going to showcase the steps along the way and kind of highlight certain things that maybe I was having an issue with, but I'll do kind of start to finish with this, and then we will look at the final product. So to start, everything was basic, straightforward, just setting up the motherboard. So getting the motherboard, getting the CPU installed, and then installing the RAM. After that, I put this inside of the case, no issues. Where I started to run into some issues was with the TUF TF120 fans and making sure that those were lined out how I wanted them to be, not only in terms of the orientation and what I was looking at in regards to airflow. I also just have a difficult time when you initially install fans because you have to thread them. It's just really hard on my hand and ended up getting a blister just because I was installing so many of them. And with this, the daisy chaining, I'm not a cable guy in terms of like being really good at how I organize those cables. I always struggle there. Here, you're daisy chaining all of those fans together. There's just a lot going on with that and making sure that you have all the RGB connectors set up. And then here I have 3 headers for RGB connections on the motherboard, so I had to be mindful of that. I'm installing the M.2s. I do like that Q latch. It is so easy to do. This specific spot where you can actually just press everything. There's no screws or anything like that. This is the easiest install for an M.2 that I've ever had, but you only have one like that. The other locations you do have these screws that you're going to have to be mindful of, and I do like the slider here if you do have a different size for your M.2 SSD. I totally forgot that I had other M.2s in the old build. I actually got everything set up and I was like, where's all my games? And it's in these other M.2s. I don't showcase me installing those. I did go back later and I was like, dude, I got to install the other 3. So I ended up taking all of the M.2 slots up in this build. And then after the motherboard is set up, now we can start actually just installing some things inside of the case. Here you can see this is fully modular for this case. I like that ease of access when it comes to the panels. Just push that button. There's no screws or anything. Just pop right out and then you're good to go. And then a lot of this just requires removing the straps, pulling things out. You don't have a ton of screws that you're going to mess with until you get into some of the internal components where you are, for instance, removing a bracket so you can install fans or a radiator or anything like that. And installing the motherboard, I don't know why, but for me, it's one of the most satisfying parts of the build, where you just initially get that thing lined out and screwed in, and then you can start building upon that, which I actually install the front panel AIO cables while everything's just more free before it's all cluttered, because it's just, for me, a little bit easier to do, because once I start cramming things in here, it gets really tight, and that can be frustrating when trying to connect some of these cables, which for the power, I'm not quite sure why I ran it through the side there instead of the bottom. ended up not going back and correcting that, just left it as is. You can't see it, so it's okay, but I did catch that later reviewing the footage. And then I installed the power supply unit. I like the fact that it does sit up high like that, but I wanted to get that in there before I started messing with the fans. Now I did remove the bottom bracket where you can put a hard drive or an SSD. Then this is actually where you can mount a radiator. I removed this just for ease of access for these plates. So these plates cover the other location where you can put a radiator if you wanted to, but these plates are where you can mount a regular HDD or an SSD. And so you can then take these plates and put it on this rear bracket if you wanted to. Orientation here is key though, because I installed these essentially like upside down. So when I come back to actually install the SSDs, getting cables to them just doesn't work. And I'm going to showcase that here in a second. But I got all of the side fans installed, made sure the cables were in the orientation I wanted them so I could easily daisy chain them together. And then I moved on to the back installing the hard drives. And this is where I'm showcasing like, hey, this doesn't work because there's openings on the bottom. You can see where one is not in the correct orientation. So in regards to mounting these, you do want to check that first, because the bottom openings is where you can run your SATA cables and your power cables to this. So looking at the orientation here, you can see you're going to want it to the side. So now I have them all lined out correctly so I can easily get those cables to that. And it's one of those things where I like the fact that they have the openings, but with the cables that I'm using, I ended up needing two. I couldn't string all three together. I ran two separate. One actually could handle two SSDs, and then there just wasn't enough cable length to reach the third. You could probably do that if you stuffed them above and didn't go through those slots, but then once you try to actually tuck this in, that may be problematic. So I was mindful of that and trying to make sure that I didn't have any issues with trying to just squeeze all of my cables in here. You can see here where that pops out too. It won't firmly hold if those cables are trying to push this out. So organization here is key, which again is an area that I struggle with, but I did get it mounted in and made sure everything was tucked underneath there. Now this is the bottom bracket where you can actually mount more fans. Here you can do the 3 120s or 2 140s. It is very snug with this. This is me just shifting these down because it has to be precise, because there's just enough room for exactly the three. There's no wiggle room when it comes to these fans. And then going through the daisy chaining process again, making sure that I have the orientation that I want with all of these, and that I can actually get this one tucked underneath, but then making sure that one of the cables can come through for the RGB header on the front, and then with the other one I was able to kind of move that around and get it to another location for the fan header. So kind of a tight squeeze with all of that, and that's where I was running into some issues, was making sure that the orientation for the SSD plates were correct, and then making sure I had all the fans in the correct orientation and daisy chained correctly, so I didn't have to go back through and then reorganize them, which unfortunately I ended up having to do that for the radiator, which brings us over to the radiator now and installing the AIO water cooler. So the initial spot I wanted to mount this was on the top, and so I ended up taking off that top bracket. And what I wanted to do was have the radiator sit on top of the bracket and then the fans on the bottom. So essentially that bracket kind of splits between the fan and the radiator. The issue that I ran into though, the screws are not long enough to make that happen. So started to look at where else could I potentially mount this. Wasn't really thinking like, can I just adjust this in regards to the bracket orientation? Instead, I just started to go down the rabbit hole of, can I mount it on the side? Is that going to work? Can I mount it on the bottom? I can't really do the rear because I have the SSDs there. Started to think maybe I need to actually change those to somewhere else or even get rid of them. So I went ahead and mounted the fans to the radiator because I knew that was the only way I could actually do this, and then started to check those other locations. So I started with the side here, started to realize with this being the slightly larger radiator, although it is a 360 AIO water cooler, it's just not going to fit. In terms of the height, it just won't actually fit in that location. I'm hitting this bottom bracket and it's one that you can't actually move. So here for the side, it won't work. I think for most coolers, you're not going to have an issue, but this thing is just shy of 400 millimeters in terms of that length. It is a beefy radiator. And then I started to think, well, I'll just put it on the bottom. Problem there is, because of how tall it is with the fans, you're going to cover up all of those bottom pin connectors. It's just not going to work. Now, they just say the 3 locations: top, side, rear. The reason I say you could put another one on the bottom is you could technically put a 120 millimeter radiator and fan on the furthest slot on the bottom, as long as your tubing is long enough. That won't cover up any of those bottom pins on your motherboard. So I sat there for a while because I was debating if I was going to actually try to mount this to the rear, but I was like, I just don't want to not be able to see the fans on that thing because they are that RGB lighting. So looked at the top bracket, realized one, when I set it back on the top here, I actually did it upside down. So with the fans just connected to the radiator, now it will actually fit there and I'm not going to have any issues. So you can turn this thing upside down, or it can be right side up depending on how you want either a fan with the radiator to actually sit or just fans by themselves. So you can kind of raise and lower that a little bit. Once I had this, then it was like, all right, this thing will fit, but it is extremely snug. Like, I have to kind of cram it in there. It is the largest radiator you could potentially fit in here if it was, because it's 399.5 millimeters, like I said, just shy of 400 millimeters long. If it was literally 400, just that extra 0.5, I don't think it would fit, because I am having to cram this thing into that space. Now with this, I knew it was going to be a really tight squeeze, so I wanted to get any of the top cables, more specifically the cables from the power supply unit that are going to power the CPU on the motherboard up top here, plugged in before I started to actually get that radiator set, because it was going to be such a tight squeeze after that. I didn't want to have to fight it. So after that issue was resolved, I could finally mount the block here onto the CPU. That really straightforward. You just make sure that you have the bottom clips in the AMD orientation and not the Intel orientation, and then you just tighten these all the way down. And then you have this top screen which is in the way, so you got to remove it, but that's easy to do. It's just held on by magnets. You can just pop that thing off and then tighten the screws down. And then after that, just getting all of the fans plugged into the motherboard. Again, a really tight squeeze, but if I had to do the CPU cables, like, no way, I'd actually have to remove this just to get those in anyways. That's how tight of a squeeze it was. But kudos to ROG, because those cables being so flexible made it extremely easy to actually bend those and get those out of the way. So I didn't have any poking up and pushing on the radiator or the fans. And then for the fans that are actually attached to the radiator, I forgot in the front, this being a fully modular design with this case, you can simply just remove that glass, and then you have the magnetic cabling here, which is just extremely easy to use. I hope down the road this is just standard across the board for any fans. I know there are a lot of other magnetic fans out there, but in terms of the connection and then just anything that you can buy on the market, I really hope we just see this become the standard, because it's so easy and convenient compared to daisy chaining a bunch of these together with cables and then the mess that creates in the back that you have to deal with. So now it's just plugging everything in outside of getting the GPU, which I did last. And this, because of these cables being so flexible, very easy to do. But again, I'm not really good at cable management, so you'll kind of see that in certain snippets where it looks like a mess. I cleaned it up as best I can, but again, that's not my forte. But I like the fact that these are so bendable that it made it easy to at least get these out of the way and to push these in that cavity where you can kind of bunch them together, and so they're out of the way and they're not pushing up against anything, which I'm always surprised when I do a build where you're like, man, I have so much room to do the cables, I'll organize this, and then you're at the tail end of it and you're like, whoa, there's not as much space once all of these cables and all of these other components are in here like I thought there was going to be, especially when you are dealing with daisy chained fan cables, which to me, they're just hard to organize and they are a mess. At least with the power supply cables, I can actually just kind of bunch those up together and kind of push them over to the side. And I had to make sure that there was enough room for the SSDs on that rear radiator tray as well. Now on the back towards the bottom, you have a cover for the GPU slots. So there, the screws are not exposed. It hides those. I do like this feature. And so with this, you can keep a very clean, minimal look to the outside. And this is where I just installed the GPU here and then ran the power cable to it. And I like the fact that this does come with the updated power cables for these very power hungry GPUs. And then after that, just some sticker peels, put everything back together. And then the fun part, which is booting this thing up and hoping that there aren't any issues, which thankfully I didn't have any. So here, putting on all the panels again, making sure that I put the top on as well, putting on that side tempered glass panel, and then swapping out the old temporary PC for this one. And this is where these straps do come in handy with moving this, because it's just so much easier to grab those than grab the bottom and the top of some of these other PC cases. And so this is me just getting that set up really quick. Kind of nerve-wracking every time you boot up for the first time, because you're just fingers crossed hoping that you don't have any issues. And I was fortunate here that I didn't, which is awesome. And then we have all the awesome RGB fans in there that look really, really nice. And then our last part is the just protective sleeve or the sticker peel here. And now you can really see how clean and slick this thing really looks. So to end out the video here, I do want to showcase some of the things that I mentioned earlier with this, like the BIOS here, allowing 1080p now. So you do have HD. Now this is not HD. I'm going to showcase that here in a second so you can see the difference. But I also want to showcase the Q dashboard. This is the layout of the motherboard. So you can just click on the component that you want to adjust any of the settings with. This just makes it very easy to find this stuff. I like this feature, along with the HD setting here, because the BIOS has just kind of felt neglected for a long time. Now we're starting to see a lot of quality of life upgrades with this. And now this is in HD. So the biggest thing, it's kind of hard to see on my camera, but you may have noticed like the text just got more crisp and clear here. Everything kind of condensed because you just have the higher resolution. Going back to the Q dashboard, this just looks cleaner compared to what we were looking at a second ago. But let's do side-by-side comparison with just the general layout and then the Q dashboard between these two resolutions. So on the left-hand side, we have the regular resolution, which is there by default. You do have to go into the BIOS and enable HD. Keep that in mind. And then on the right-hand side, we have the HD version of the BIOS. This doesn't do it justice. It is definitely much more apparent in person in regards to just the normal portion of the BIOS here. Really what you're going to see is on the left-hand side, the text looks more kind of sprawled out, where on the right-hand side, it just looks more condensed and a little bit sharper and more crisp. When you get to the Q dashboard, I think this is where you can, with these images, notice a much larger difference, because on the left hand side we have the regular resolution, on the right hand side we have the HD version, and it just looks much cleaner, way sharper. It's just easier to navigate and see all the different components with this as well in person. Not that you can't when it's in the lower resolution, it's just a much nicer visual experience when you do have the BIOS in HD. Next, I mentioned that I got the TUF lighting kit specific to this PC case, and this thing is really nice, easy to set up, it's magnetic. The hardest part was actually just running the cables to the back, and that's not even hard, but out of everything, that was the hardest part, to just run them through the little holes, because again, this is magnetic. It literally just slides right in and then you're done. Ran into an issue on the top because I was trying to push this in, didn't realize that there was another fan cable in the way, but once I got that out of the way, it just literally clipped right in, and then it's good to go once you plug this in and daisy chain it to the other ARGB fans that you may have in this. And that's going to be it for the setup. I couldn't be happier with the final product here. This looks incredible and performance has been amazing and extremely customizable, both in the Armory Crate software and the AIO 64 Extreme 1-year subscription that you get with the Ryujin 3. That gives you a lot of tools to actually adjust and just customize and overclock and things like that, along with the motherboard and all the features that you get there as well. There's just so many things that I can do with this now. And that's one of the big things that I like about this particular build. I also love the TUF case with all of the customization and just the ease of use that I have with that, like the side panels and just how easy it is to remove those. And so if I need to adjust something, it's not a whole long drawn out process. It's just I can get in there really quick, change something, and then get out. I also love the TUF fans and the light bar that I got, and then paired all of that with the massive Ryujin 3 LCD screen, and then all the customization that you get for the lighting as well through the Armory Crate software. So now you can change and make all these cool things with the lighting. Just basic stuff in Armory Crate, but you can also use Aura Sync and then create your own stuff there. And then you have all the changes that you can make to the Ryujin 3 display with adding different GIFs to that. You can actually display different content on that as well in terms of temperatures for your CPU or your GPU. You can just do time there, or even just a still image if you wanted. For the fans, one of my favorite options is the adaptive color, which will replicate colors from a specific zone on your screen that you choose. When I pair this with my Gobi DreamView Pro, that makes for a pretty wild gaming experience, because that's doing a similar thing, but it's using a camera to actually see what's on my screen, and then it's displaying it to the various lights that I've set up from Gobi. Now, I don't use that all the time. It can be a bit much, but when I do use it for specific games, it's a blast. So that's going to wrap this video up. A big thank you to ROG for helping me with this build, sending all these components over, and I'm elated with how this turned out. It's such an amazing build. I'm going to have a link for all of these components in the description if you want to pick it up. If there's something in regards to these components in this video that maybe I didn't cover and you have questions about that, let me know in the comment section and we'll make sure to answer that for you there. If you like the video, hit the like button for me as it helps the channel out. If you want to continue to follow along with all my content, hit the subscribe button for me. And as always, thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.